This is the brand new ROG Ally X. This is meant to be the premium Windows handheld. And while this video is sponsored by ASUS, I gotta be honest with you, I'm going into it being a little bit skeptical. Because while I liked the original Ally, it did have some issues, but by far my biggest problem with all of these handhelds is the fact that Windows 11 just isn't great, and you really need to lean on the Armoury Crate in this case, but the software to kind of help hide the Windowsy bits so you can enjoy your games and not have to deal with Windows 11 and touchscreens and all the things that don't work well on a 7-inch screen. So let's see if the Ally X is actually worth it, shall we? Now it's important to mention that the Ally X is not replacing the original Ally. This is an improved, more expensive option that comes in at $800. So certainly not cheap, but you are getting a lot of pretty major improvements. So this has double the battery capacity. It also has a tweaked design. It has better cooling. There's a lot of things they've done to improve this, including it's got more RAM. But let's see what we've got. Oh, you have to actually plug it in to enable the battery. That's good to know. And then it just tells me to turn on Armoury Crate immediately. Yes, I will be doing that. So even though the battery is twice as big, so they went from a 40 watt hour to an 80 watt hour battery on the Ally X, I'll say it actually doesn't feel that much heavier. I mean, I have to do them side by side, but I think the difference is only like a few dozen grams. So like I immediately can tell like the thumbsticks feel like they're maybe slightly more offset up and down. They've also removed the XG mobile port in favor of a second USB-C, which is nice. And it does have now an additional bit of cooling. So you've got the vents here, but you also have a vent here. That's actually nice. Okay, we've got ourselves a 65 watt power adapter. I will say the fact that it comes with not one, but two of the little stands where you can just kind of prop your Ally up if you want to like connect a controller or something to it. That's a nice little feature. Let me get this thing fired up, download some updates, and let's see, is the Ally X worth it, or should I stick to the Steam Deck OLED? I'm not gonna compare this to the Switch Lite. Don't worry. As someone who's been fairly sick the last few days, it has been really nice to have some quality time with the ROG Ally X. So first and foremost, by what this is not. This is not a revolutionary change compared to the original Ally. Now I say that seems like a bad thing, but it's actually not. So the biggest advantage here, hands down, is the battery life. Now, when the first ROG Ally came out last year, it was really the first of the sort of proper Windows handheld PCs. You know, it brought out the Z1 Extreme, which was a huge step up over something like the Steam Deck and pretty much anything else that had existed until that point. While it did have its fair share of teething problems, my biggest issue with it was really the battery. Only a 40 watt hour battery with such a powerful chip inside meant that in some cases you could get like an hour of battery life on the original Ally, which just was not enough in my opinion. However, the Ally X now has an 80 watt hour battery. They've literally doubled the size of the battery, meaning that not only does this have, as far as I know, the biggest battery of any of the PC handhelds, period, and they've done that without really impacting the weight. Now, yes, technically the Ally X is slightly heavier than the original Ally, largely because they've done a lot of very smart engineering to sort of reconfigure the interior, shave off as much sort of space as possible. I know when I first got my hands on of this back at Computex, ASUS actually showed me some of the prototypes and some of the things they had done to really just shave every little bit of weight possible. Even though this is slightly heavier, it actually feels more comfortable in my hands, largely because I think they've done a lot of small sort of like ergonomic tweaks when it comes to the grips, when it comes to the weight balance, even when it comes to small stuff like the way that they've positioned the buttons and the sticks and everything. Everything has been like ever so slightly tweaked, but it's been tweaked to kind of give you that sort of slightly more ergonomic feel. Now, of course, this is a sponsored video, but if I'm being honest with you, this is the most comfortable PC handheld that I've used. If I was gonna just sum up the whole Ally X experience, it very much feels like ASUS took the feedback that they got from the original Ally and applied it here. Let me go through some of the things that have not changed on the Ally X. The screen is the exact same, quite decent, but nothing spectacular. It's a 1080p 120 Hz IPS display, and because you've got the Z1 Extreme inside, you do actually have the performance to play games at 1080p, even like medium-high settings sometimes. On top of that, the AMD Ryzen Z1 Extreme on the inside is also unchanged. Now, technically, it is actually a little bit faster than on the original Ally, largely because they've outfitted it with slightly faster RAM, and importantly, it now has more RAM. So the original Ally had 16 gigabytes. This has 24, which means that the Ally X can actually dedicate a full 8 gigabytes of RAM to the actual graphics, which can make a difference for some more demanding games. So it's not a huge leap. I mean, you're probably looking at 10% or less improvement on most games as far as like FPS going from the Ally to the Ally X. But putting these things together, it does add up to a slightly nicer experience. The cooling has also been improved. Now, ASUS have a bunch of specific stats on like how they changed it and stuff. And look, if we're being honest, the Ally, the original, was maybe a little bit undercooled. Now, they have enhanced it by adding an additional vent on the top of the Ally X. And I will say that the fan noise is actually very reasonable. To get the most performance, you really need to throw something like 25-30 watts, which is what the turbo mode in this does. And I will say that even when you're running in turbo mode, the fan noise is actually very reasonable, as are the actual temperatures. So when you're actually holding it via the grips and using the controller, it's not really all that warm to the touch, which again, just sort of to me, feels like ASUS taking another step toward trying to take care of some of the smaller issues with the original Ally. So they've removed the XG mobile port, which is their proprietary external GPU, in favor of just dual USB-Cs, which I'm a big fan of. It means it's easier for you to charge it, plug in dongles and whatnot. And one of these USB-C is a full USB 4, which means that you can plug in something like a external GPU via Thunderbolt, and it should perform relatively well. You also now do have a full-size M.2 2280 SSD slot. Unlike a lot of the other handhelds that have those much smaller SSDs, which are a little bit harder to find and importantly kind of limit your capacity, you can load up an 8 terabyte SSD in here no problem. And while I don't think you're technically supposed to upgrade it yourself, you can upgrade it yourself. You know, this is kind of a hard thing to review, if I'm honest with you, because it feels like a tired old trope of like, this is their Ally, this should have shipped from the beginning. They obviously had to get something out the door, and ROG being ROG, they shipped something as quickly as they could, and they have now spent the last year refining the design. And I think that there's something to that, you know, it's not like every year you have to throw everything out and start over from scratch. Now, if you're looking at this as like an upgrade to your existing Ally, it's not going to be a revolutionary change. I mean, yes, having the 1 terabyte SSD, having the higher RAM capacity, but the bigger battery is honestly the main selling point. At $800, the Ally X, in my opinion, is the best PC gaming handheld you can buy. Now, I don't think that should be a huge surprise because it's also one of the most expensive. I mean, they really have pretty much thrown everything and the kitchen sink at it. When it comes to actually gaming on it, there are a few main areas that stand out. Even running on turbo mode, playing like full AAA games, I'm still seeing 2 hours plus, which is phenomenal. So 2 hours is probably on the shorter end, if I'm honest with you. If you're not running it in turbo mode, if you're not trying to max everything out, you actually can get closer to 3 hours pretty easily. And of course, as always, if you're running a more demanding game, if you want to really enable some of the settings when it comes to limiting your frame rate and whatnot, 4 hours is actually probably doable. But for me, I'm running this thing turbo mode maxed out, and 2 hours is pretty decent for me. And really does rival something like the Steam Deck OLED, which let's not forget is a much less powerful handheld. Now, speaking of the Steam Deck, I don't think it should be much of a surprise to you. That's really what I'm comparing this to, because in my opinion, the Steam Deck OLED is terrific. There are a couple of major advantages here. First and foremost is the fact that it is, of course, running the Z1 Extreme, which is significantly more powerful. The Steam Deck, in my opinion, typically runs games at 720p, like low-medium settings based on how demanding they are. And it's fine, like that OLED display still looks terrific and, you know, it runs cool and quiet and yada, 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 right? Like OLED, great. But the ROG Ally X is in another league when it comes to performance. You're not playing at 720p low. You're playing at 1080p, medium, high. You can actually get close to saturating the 120 frames per second on this display based on the game. And that does make a big difference. When I think about the kind of AAA games that I like to play, such as Baldur's Gate 3, it's totally playable on the Steam Deck. But it's like playing on a PS4 versus a PS5, right? I mean, it is a significant difference when you have the extra performance to throw at it with the Ally. It's both a pro and a con that it, of course, is running Windows. I will freely admit that I have been a pretty negative person when it comes to Windows on these handhelds because Windows is not designed for a handheld gaming PC. It is only thanks to the work of companies such as Valve with their big picture mode in Steam, and of course ROG, which have done a lot of work with Armory Crate to make it a pretty good experience where you don't really have to dive into Windows that often, but you still do. And it's still not a good experience when I'm trying to install a game or do something and then suddenly a full screen command prompt shows up and I have to like freaking tab through to figure out where my window went and stuff. It's just, there's a lot of stuff that I feel like if Microsoft had made a little bit more of an investment in actually making Windows was better for these, it would make a huge difference. Because with the Steam Deck, yes, SteamOS is certainly not perfect, but I feel like I never have to go into regular Linux mode unless I want to, right? It's a very cohesive experience. Everything works well with touch, everything works well with the controller, and I would say the Ally is up there, certainly among one of the very best when it comes to Windows handhelds, but you're still dealing with Windowsy stuff. On the flip side, you do have advantages when it comes to running Windows. So you have essentially no restrictions on the kind of games that you can play. And the biggest issue you're gonna have is playing games that need a mouse and keyboard because you have dual USB-C ports. It's actually really easy to sort of dock this or even dock this with a monitor and use it as a little sort of laptop/desktop. The sun has come out to bless the ROG Ally. Whether or not the Ally X is for you really comes down to one question. Do you want the best PC gaming handheld on the market? Because if so, this is pretty clearly the answer. You know, you've got the performance, you've got the cooling, importantly, you've got the battery life, which is the first time I've ever really been able to say that about a Windows gaming handheld. But it is not going to be the value pick. You know, for that, you're probably going to want to actually stick with the original ROG Ally, or even something like a Steam Deck OLED, which, while it's significantly less powerful, is still going to be significantly cheaper and give you a very solid experience, especially if you don't want to deal with the Windowsiness of a handheld. That being said, the ROG team pretty clearly laid out the plan for the Ally X being a significantly improved version of the original, and they absolutely delivered on that. When I first tried the original ROG Ally last year, it didn't really click with me. It was not the fully fledged package right out the gate. Now, to give ROG some credit, they have made some pretty significant enhancements when it comes to stuff like the software, Armory Crate, all these kind of things. Like, it's a much better handheld now than it was when it first came out. To ROG's credit, they have extended the warranty. Even if you already had purchased an ROG Ally, they extended it from 1 to 2 years, which was absolutely the right thing to do. As far as I can tell, they have made some pretty significant steps forward on their actual warranty and support. But there's something about the Ally X that feels like it works a lot better for me. It's not just the battery, I mean, that's a big part of it, but like the ergonomics are just so much better, even though it looks so similar and all these little tweaks are just tweaks, but like between the nice little like sort of finish on the grip, which just says ROG like a bajillion times. I mean, even the way that the sticks are positioned, it feels very natural in my hand. I can't just say a single one of these makes the difference. But it's like when you put it all together, this really is, in my opinion, the best Windows-powered handheld PC, period. Will an ROG Ally 2 make another leap when there's a Z2 Extreme or something? Yeah, probably, but like whatever. I mean, we can't all live our lives waiting for next year's upgrade, right? Like you gotta jump on now. And I will say that the Ally X is a far more complete package than the original Ally has ever been. Now that being said, you can still actually purchase the original ROG Ally. So that is still on sale in addition to the Ally X, which is significantly less expensive. So depending on where you put your preferences, a lot of like the software and tweaks and stuff have come across to that. There are a lot of advantages to the Ally X between the additional RAM, between the faster RAM, which can give you a little bit more performance, the vastly improved battery, the improved ergonomics, the better cooling. I mean, there's just so much there. The ability to easily run a full-size SSD if you want to run up to 2, 4, or even 8 terabytes. There's a lot going for the Ally X. As always, I'll have a link in the description if you want to check it out. And again, huge thank you to the ROG team for not only sponsoring this video, but for giving me such an early look at the Ally X. I was able to try it at Computech, spend some quality time with this unit, and I will say that they have made a lot of very, very legit improvements. If only I could say the same thing about Windows.